Welcome back. Over the next couple of meetings, we're going to explore the primary purpose of this group, giving each of you the opportunity to experience healthy relationships and spiritual growth. To take full advantage of that opportunity, you'll have to take shared ownership of this group and support its success. That process will begin during this study. Next time, we'll talk about how to build healthy relationships. But right now, we're going to take a look at spiritual growth. If you're going to help one another grow, it's a good idea to clearly identify what spiritual growth is and how it works. And that's what Jenny Boyette is going to talk to you about right now.
I grew up the middle child in a divorced family. I was always the peacemaker. I was all about avoiding conflict. I wanted to please everybody, and I really struggled with offering others my perspective because I didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And if I'm honest, I didn't want anyone to disagree with me or to be upset or angry. So keeping my perspective to myself was partially about the other person's feelings, but it was also about making sure I felt loved and accepted. Over the years, I've made a lot of progress in this area. It's one of the main ways I've grown spiritually, and group has been a crucial part of that process. In the New Testament, it says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds." I've heard that verse a bunch of times, but it wasn't until I was in group that I really got it. Although I may have a natural urge to please others, I can't let that urge get in the way of the opportunity, the responsibility to really be there for them and to spur them on towards love and good deeds. Now, if I'm totally real, I still struggle with offering my perspective today if I'm not sure how the other person may respond. I still have to lean on God in order to open up. I still have to pray a lot in order to prepare myself. And I probably always will. And that's not entirely a bad thing. Being reluctant to share my thoughts means I tend to really think through them before I open up. So, giving people my honest perspective will probably always be a challenge. But I'm better at it now than I used to be, and in the future I'll be better at it than I am now. And that's okay because spiritual growth isn't about arriving at a destination. There's no series of classes you can take to learn information that will make you spiritually grown. It just doesn't work like that. Spiritual growth is about application. It's about living out the truth you find in Scripture. Knowing that little verse in Hebrews is true is one thing, but practicing it in my real life is a lot more difficult. But it's the practicing over and over through time that has caused me to grow. And you're not always going to get it right, none of us do. But the goal is to live out our faith better and better over time. Because spiritual growth is movement. It's a journey. Every step forward is progress, and any step forward makes a difference. That means growth isn't always about big, dramatic moments like accepting Christ or being baptized. In fact, most of our steps forward are small steps in the right direction. They're simple acts of trust in God or small demonstrations of love for others. Spiritual growth is also visible. It's not measured in information you gather about God and faith. It's measured in the way you live your life, in the choices that you make, and how you set your priorities. And those things can be seen by others. This is why group is so important. Since growth mostly happens in small incremental steps, we each need to be connected to a group of people who know us well enough to recognize, encourage, and celebrate the small changes. That's why growing spiritually requires relationship. You can't do it alone. Now, we usually think about spiritual growth as a purely vertical relationship. We assume it only has to do with how we relate to God. Does He see us as good or bad? Does He give us credit for trying? Or does He ding us every time we fail to obey Him? But the truth is, if we're going to grow spiritually, we have to pay attention to our horizontal relationships as well as our vertical one. In fact, you can't have a good relationship with God if you have terrible relationships with other people. God cares about how we treat others. In fact, Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples, records a conversation between Jesus and a religious leader. This expert in the law asked him a question. "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Now it says in the text that this guy asked his question because he was trying to test Jesus. He was asking him the kind of question that was bound to make someone in the crowd angry, right? If Jesus picked a greatest commandment, that would mean all the other commandments were less great. So Jesus' response is really interesting, partly because of how he shows he's a lot more clever than the expert in the law, but mostly because of what it tells us about God's values. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your mind." This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets hang on those two commandments. Jesus said there are two greatest commandments. First, love God with all of yourself, and second, love other people as you love yourself. Notice that he said the second commandment is like the first one. Loving other people is like loving God. And that if you do both of those things, you're obeying every commandment, because all the law and prophets, everything written in the Bible, hangs on these vertical and horizontal relationships. Those verses in Matthew 22 have influenced the way we talk about spiritual growth. They're why we say that the goal of spiritual growth is growth in these three vital relationships: intimacy with God, community with insiders, and influence with outsiders. Intimacy with God, community with insiders, and influence with outsiders. Intimacy with God is obvious. That's your vertical relationship with God. Community with insiders and influence with outsiders is a way of describing your horizontal relationships, because loving your neighbor includes those who share your beliefs and those who don't. Spiritual growth is growing in each of those three relationships. That's why there is no finish line. It's always a challenge to love God and to love others well. There's always room for improvement, but growth in the three vital relationships is the goal of spiritual growth. So now that we know the goal of spiritual growth, let's talk a little bit about the process of growing spiritually. If this group is intended to support your spiritual growth, how does it do that? You leverage what we call the 5 faith catalysts: practical teaching, private disciplines, providential relationships, personal ministry, and pivotal circumstances. Now, the catalysts aren't a comprehensive list. They're just things that we've seen pop up in almost everyone's stories about how their faith has grown over the years. The 5 faith catalysts are a set of gauges you can use to recognize opportunities for growth, both for you and for the other members of this group. You have some control over 4 of the 5 catalysts. If you want to grow spiritually, you can seek out practical teaching from sermons, books, podcasts, or videos. You can develop a habit of private disciplines like reading the Bible and praying. You can pay attention to how God might be using providential relationships with others to influence and grow you. Relationships like members of this group, mentors, or close friends. And make an effort to better know your unique talents and gifts so you can put them to use in your personal ministry, like serving at your church or assisting those in community or volunteering at a local nonprofit. The 5th catalyst, pivotal circumstances. You don't control. Key events, both good and bad, unfold in each of our lives, and they shape us. And while we can't control them, with God's help and those He's put in our lives, we can respond to them well. In these moments, we can ask ourselves, what does it look like to trust God in this circumstance? And we hope this group will also find ways to support, encourage, and care for you during these circumstances, helping you focus on trusting God and growing your faith, because that's what a group does. It's a small community made up of people committed to supporting one another as they grow in the 3 vital relationships. So with one another's help, let's keep moving forward one step at a time.
So, if you want to grow spiritually, do 2 things. First, keep moving forward, because spiritual growth is movement and every step forward counts. Second, keep in mind that even now, at the very beginning of your group, you can start to examine God's activity in your lives through the lens of the 5 faith catalyst, and you can help one another wrestle with how to apply God's truth. Now, before you go, I want to share an important detail about next time. If you take a look at your discussion guides, you'll spend a big part of your next meeting getting to know one another. That's important because the relationships in this group have the potential to influence your relationship with God. That's why if you're intentional about building friendships at the beginning, it'll make this group even better. At the end of this meeting, use your discussion guides to write down the order in which you'll share a little bit about yourselves. Next time, as many of you will go as possible. There won't be time for everyone, but don't worry. A couple people can share at each of the meetings that follow until everyone is gone. Use the resources in your discussion guide to help you plan what you'll tell the group. Now, you won't tell your life stories, but you should share more than just surface details like where you work and what you do with your spare time. Go a little deeper and talk about some of the key people and events that helped shape you. Now spend the rest of this meeting talking about the message you just watched. Use the questions in your discussion guides to get things started.